So we're going to first talk to Marg. Marg is from New Zealand, and she worked at Christchurch Polytechnic in women's courses, helping to set up and run courses for women returning to the workforce, an intro to the trades for women and others. These courses politicised women who came through, so has a long history in feminism and in working in those areas. And we'll talk to Marg more about it. She moved to Wellington, and I'm jumping a bit of the bio, but moved to Wellington in 2012 and had been on the Lesbian Radio Collective and then the so-called inclusive agenda. Ended Wellington Lesbian Radio, and it was instrumental in Marg's decision when she retired in 2019 to put energy into working for women and girls, especially for lesbians, by joining the fight against gender ideology. In 2020, Marg set up a meeting of Wellington lesbians, and so, after a hiatus of many years, Lava was reformed to fight a new form of lesbian invisibility. So, Marg, thank you so much. It's the middle of the night for you.
It is.
New Zealand. So thank you for coming on. And can you tell us about Lava and what's going on with it? What's important about it?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Jo. It's great to be able to be here, even if it is the middle of the night. Yeah, Lava was first formed in 1988, and this is, I think, quite important because Lava was formed initially to work for lesbian protection under our Human Rights Act. So homosexual law reform came through in the mid-80s, but there was still no protection from discrimination. And the key thing that Lava wanted was that not only are lesbians in the Human Rights Act and protected against discrimination, but that actually the word lesbian is used. And so we became the first country in the world to have the word lesbian in our legislation with same-sex orientation. So we have quite a proud history with that achievement. And we were, of course, the first country in the world to give women the vote. So we're somewhat gutted about where we've got to after that proud beginning. And now it's a new form. It's the same issue. It's our visibility, but we're also back to fighting for our right to be accepted as same-sex attracted women. Our Human Rights Commission has relabeled us as same-gender attracted. And when we did an official information request, they couldn't actually say how that happened. They didn't know who'd authorised it. They didn't know when it had happened. It's just crept in to the Human Rights Commission and through them to other government organisations. So in many ways, the same as it's happened everywhere else. But we decided we wanted to keep using the Lava name because it is about our visibility as women and as lesbians.
Is there a definition in New Zealand law of what gender is?
No, in fact, it's very contradictory because we have two pieces of legislation around gender and they define it or talk about it quite differently. One says it's fixed and one says it's fluid, but they still don't define what it is.
Are they saying it's fixed to sex? It is a synonym with sex, or they're just saying it's a thing that is fixed?
It's a thing that is fixed, but that everybody has, of course.
And you've got a court case at the moment. So what's that case? What's happening with that?
What we have happening is back in 2021, Lava was excluded from Pride. We had booked and been given a stall at the Pride Fair. And then out of the blue, about 3 or 4 days before the fair was due to happen, they emailed us and told us that they couldn't give us a stall, initially not saying why, but obviously we followed up and they said it was because of our views and because we are trans exclusionary and because as the organisers of the festival, they had an obligation to protect trans people and they would be harmed and be unsafe if we were there. Even though we weren't actually going to talk about our views or what they were. They didn't ask us what the purpose of our stall was. They just excluded us. And it's a familiar story, I think. Lesbians all over the world are being excluded from Pride.
And it's so that's the sort of form of invisibility. So is that what you're saying,
That's
that
right.
by
Exactly.
saying lava cannot be at Pride, you have to go back into the closet in a way?
It's no longer acceptable to be same-sex attracted. So that's what we're fighting for, is the recognition that we're not same gender, and for the right to hold our views and have those views respected. Because we don't have in our Human Rights Act the protection of philosophical views in the same way as you do.
Yeah.
We have the protection of political opinions. So we're using that we have
Yeah.
a right to these opinions.
Well, that's very
So,
interesting, because if you
mm,
win that, then that's
mm,
a precedent that it doesn't just have to be a philosophical view. It can be a
exactly.
political opinion, and the
Yeah.
personal is political. Feminism is
Of
political, isn't
course.
it?
Exactly.
How far has the case gone, and what's going on with it?
Well, we now have our hearing dates. There's been all the things that I had no idea need to happen when you do this sort of thing. We had or do have an expert witness who's a professor of political philosophy, and so who talks about our view as being worthy of protection and being political, because up till now it's been defined very narrowly under the Act as party political. You have a right to be a member of the Labour Party and not have that affect your job, etc. But we are broadening that and saying, as you have said, that the personal is political and that these views are political and worthy of protection. And Pride, in response, is saying that we are bigoted and hateful and harmful and transphobic and don't respect any of them and want them all to disappear and die and so on.
When's the date? When's it coming up?
Well, there's 4 weeks, so it's split. It's not 4 weeks in a row. So our first week is the end of July, the last week in July. Our second week is the first week in September, then the third week in September, and then the first week in October. So it's very spread out. And this is because they have so many expert witnesses, 19 expert witnesses, and they have to be cross-examined and responded to. And our lawyer is trying to change that, because none of them are addressing the political opinion issue. What they're doing is just saying that our views are so disgusting and terrible that they don't deserve protection. And they've got 19 expert witnesses to say that that is true. For a long time in New Zealand, it's been very difficult to get our views across. They're not, the mainstream media doesn't represent them, or hasn't until quite recently. We do feel the tide is turning, but until recently it's been very, very difficult to get anything published, to get interviews, just to get the issue out in the open and talked about. And so
And yet,
most people don't understand it. Interesting things happen, like our current government, for all that they're a right-wing government whom I find it very difficult to support. The coalition, one of the coalition partners, has been quite strong and clear on this issue. And the Associate Minister of Health has issued a ruling that the Ministry of Health, the communications they put out, must use biological sex and not refer to people with uteruses and so on. And that was a
great.
very important statement that came out just 2 or 3 days before the UK Supreme Court ruling. So that was brilliant timing. It's hard to know what's happening for ordinary people, because the view that let them be, no one's being hurt, be kind, don't be horrible, has been so strong. But there has been some research over the years that has shown quite clearly that most people do not agree with the extremes of gender ideology or gender identity ideology.
Hmm.
But that the last research was, I think, about 18 months ago, and it certainly showed a majority of New Zealanders did not want men competing in women's sports and so on,
Yeah.
and believe that we need our spaces and we have the right to protect our spaces.
In the Supreme Court ruling in UK, they
Mm,
mentioned lesbians a lot, and
mm,
it was incredibly gratifying that
yeah,
our legal establishment, the pinnacle of the establishment in Britain, cares about women-only spaces and the ability of lesbians to have the right to be same-sex attracted. And that seemed to be a really big step for, I think,
Yeah.
for the mainstream society in Britain and the establishment believe in both of those things.
I think that one of the keys around that for me was that they talked about the coherence or the lack of coherence in that view that says, you know, anyone can be a woman and then all that that means, because it is an incoherent position. It just doesn't make sense. And that's what we're pushing. And, you know, in many ways, it reminds me of the 70s, you know, when we were first discovering feminism and speaking out about it, and into the 80s. And what used to happen was the men would say, but what about us? Why do you hate us? And trying to get that message across, this is not about you, this is about us. And it's still the same. This is not about trans people. This is our position and we're entitled to hold it. And that's what our case is about, that we are entitled to hold this position. It's not hateful, it's not bigoted.
That's fantastic as well. It's not about you, it's about us. Exactly. What about Lava and other lesbian organisations in New Zealand? How are they doing? Are you sort of managing to sort of have events and keep going despite all this?
We are, but there are very few lesbian organisations now, because most of them have either folded or have men as part of them. In Wellington, there's the Lesbian Library, which is still going, and there's Lava. We're just about it. There's lesbian newsletters that are online, but there's very little now. And some of that is just about the times, isn't it? We felt like the battle had been won. That was how it felt here. We can relax and get on with our lives. And then suddenly we're back into fighting again and saying, hey, here we are. And you know, we're not going to sit around and not be recognised and not be respected. And you can't tell us that our views are harmful, because they're not. They're not harming anybody. I mean, lesbian's always been a word that a lot of women have avoided using, you know, and now it's certainly not okay for younger women to be lesbian. And we know that young same-sex attracted women are being funneled down the trans path. I think becoming non-binary is what a lot of them are doing, and then they move from there into transition, and it's very sad. And women our age, 60s and 70s, are wanting to be kind. So many of them are still wanting to be kind and don't seem to understand that gender identity ideology is actually a threat to women. So that's Hilary and I outside the Michael Fowler Centre, which is where the fair was being held. And Hilary and I are the plaintiffs in the case, because Lava couldn't take the case because we're not an incorporated society. We don't have formal legal standing. So Hilary and I are doing it on behalf of Lava. So it's not us. I mean, from the point of view of the courts or the tribunal, it's us, but everyone knows that we're doing it for Lava. Can I just say that one of the things we have to do is fundraising. 4 weeks in court is really expensive. If women want to look at our website, it's very simple, lava.nz. You can read more about the case and you can donate money if you're in a position to do that. New Zealand only has 5 million people, so we struggle to raise the sort of money that's needed.